Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on how paperless employee onboarding can go beyond just automation. My name is Stephen Turner, and I work here at HR On Board as part of the marketing team, and I'll be your host for today's session. Just a bit of housekeeping before we start. During the webinar, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So please feel free to join in the conversation by asking questions as we go through, and we'll do our best to answer them all at the end. To ask a question, just click the Q&A button on the menu and pop your question into the box. I have the great pleasure of hosting today's webinar with Peter Forbes. Peter is the CEO and founder of HR On Board and has over 20 years experience in HR, working with Australia's leading organizations and helping HR teams create amazing new starter welcomes. So without further ado, take it away, Peter.
Thanks, Steve, and hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on this kind of overcast Wednesday. Looks overcast out our window in Melbourne, but I hope it's sunny wherever you are around Australia. So look, today is all about the journey of going from a paper-based onboarding system to paperless, and what we want to talk in this webinar is more about some of the things maybe you haven't thought about or haven't considered beyond the sort of basics of knowing, okay, we're going to a digital experience for all the paperwork. We've been in this space for 5 years. We've done literally thousands and thousands of new hires through our platform. We've implemented hundreds of organisations around Australia and New Zealand, and we thought it'd be good to share some of the experiences we've seen some organisations, what they need to consider and go through. So the first thing I want to talk about is really why we're here. What really is the bottom line of onboarding? And I like to show this slide to remind HR teams really what the business and executives really think about onboarding in commercial terms, because you know, we love to have engaged new hires and people who fit the culture, share the vision of the company, but really, what's the end result of this? And, you know, we really distill it down into 3 core metrics. One is that reducing the cost per hire. And you can see here, the statistic we're showing you there is, you know, by over half, reducing the cost per hire by over half. And that's actually from our data with our customers in the last financial year. Of any of our customers who are doing more than 100 onboards per year, they reduce their cost by hire by over half. And in a lot of the areas you'd expect, moving from a paper-based system to a digital system in terms of the manual processes that could be automated and the time saved in things like rekeying information, chasing up incomplete forms, those sort of things. As you go past the more just, you know, going to a digital onboarding experience for the paperwork, it's then about ROI metrics like increasing new hire productivity, and that's making sure people are, you know, are productive in their role a lot earlier, because they have the equipment, they have the knowledge, they have the infrastructure ready for them to do work. And the last metric, which is really important, is making sure people aren't leaving in the first year because of their onboarding experience. So you want to increase the amount of people who are staying, because obviously the cost to the business to replace those people is really, really expensive. And there's some metrics there from some research that's been done by Brandon Hall. This is a conversation that will interest finance, the CEO, other areas, because this affects the financial health of the business. These are real physical costs that you can display through better onboarding techniques. So before we delve into the paperless onboarding and what you need to consider beyond just the automation piece, just want to go back. We tend to split onboarding into 2 pieces. One is the transactional side of onboarding, which is kind of what we're talking about today. I've heard some people refer to it as the hygiene side of onboarding, because this is kind of like the health bits you need to do for new starters before you can worry about the engagement, the induction pieces. some terminology calls this a pre-boarding exercise, and they say, look, what we're talking about, which is, getting the contract sorted, the information collected, the offer accepted, then any internal workflow that goes along with that. So any approval processes, notifications, processing into payroll and HR. Some people actually call that the pre-boarding. We just kind of call it the transactional side, and really the objective here is to make sure that person is ready for day one. On the other side, you then have what we'd call the induction or the engagement-based onboarding. So that, and the real purpose of that is integrating new hires into the culture of the company and into the team. This also starts before day one, and in fact, it pretty much starts once they get the offer or they've accepted the offer. But that onboarding really lasts from before day one right through to either end of probation or first year. This webinar, we're focusing more on the transactional side of onboarding and what you need to consider. But next month, we're doing another webinar about the engagement piece, because it is a really important aspect of the whole onboarding experience. So first of all, before I get too much into what you need to consider, I'd just like to do a quick poll with the audience about where your current state of onboarding is. So I'm just going to launch a poll here. I'm just pressing the right button. So hopefully you get that poll up on your screen. And what we're asking about is, from a transactional or the paper-based side of onboarding, how are you currently doing it? Is everything on paper and there's lots of work? Have you partially automated it? We find a lot of companies they send out things via email, but you still got to download as a new hire, still got to download, complete, scan, sign back. Have you automated it, or are you fully automated? So I'll just wait a couple of seconds for everyone to vote. So hopefully you see that on the screen. And just so we get an understanding of, in the audience, where people are in that journey. They were kind of the categories I picked for this poll, and that partially automated is where I thought most people would land. So we'll just wait for a little bit longer, making sure everyone's putting in their votes. Okay, so we might end it there and end the poll, and I'll hopefully share the results so you can see what's going on here. Okay, so let's have a look at the results here. So yeah, kind of as I suspected that, there's some that everything's on paper, lots of manual work, and a lot are in that partially automated sort of area. And that's kind of reflective of what we see generally out there in the Australian, New Zealand sort of landscape. And that's good. So it's kind of funny that, there's a lot of talk in HR about, Workforce 2020 and things like that. And a lot of the thought leadership and a lot of, when you go to conferences, they're so far advanced about what they're talking with. But when you actually go out and talk to organizations, there's still a lot of just basic sort of mechanics that still need to be optimized before you can get to those next levels. And look, what we want to share with you today is just things you need to consider as you go across that journey. So let's get into it. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is when you move into a paperless onboarding experience, things you need to consider. And the first one is onboarding tailored for your business. So you need to ask the question, will you get the level of customization you need that will suit your business? When you move into an onboarding solution, a point onboarding solution like us will give you a higher depth of configurability over than an all-in-one HR platform. And look, that might be okay. You just need to understand what the pros and cons of different onboarding solutions are in terms of what you need. When you choose all-in-one platform for your onboarding, and they have some level of features in there, your onboarding is probably more of a generic experience, no matter what the role, the location, or the brand you work for in your business. And that might be okay. But if you do have some level of customization in terms of what you need to give to your new hires based on, their role type, their location, the particular hiring entity, there's a few things to consider. So let's talk about them. The first thing to consider when you're tailoring onboarding for your business is probably not a feature or even an attribute of your org. It's kind of this general, what we'd call is change management. So it's probably one of the most underestimated pieces in most technology projects. But let me share with you a few things we've seen. What happens, the change management piece in an onboarding project. Probably the big one is this moving from a manual to online onboarding takes a lot of thought. It's not a simple translation of your paper-based processes to an online, because there's subtle changes when you move from that. Even something as simple as an offer letter doesn't really make a lot of sense in a digital process, because usually that offer letter sort of breaks down into a bit of an introduction in the new hire portal, and then the employment contract becomes the offer itself. So there's not a one-to-one translation between a paper-based process and a digital onboarding process. The other one is about comfortable with things like electronic acceptance versus a wet signature. So often when you move into an onboarding online experience, it triggers some internal reviews and considerations internally. The biggest one we probably see is legal reviews of your existing contracts and agreements, because it often triggers actually we need to look at that. The other piece is understanding the end-to-end process of what you're currently doing with your onboarding process, and then knowing what you want that to be in the future. So that's that review of the as is and to be processes. Sometimes it's interesting, it reveals there's more to the onboarding process that HR or the talent and acquisition team may actually realize. And it's important to get all the stakeholders involved. And there may be some you're not aware of, whether that's from what IT are doing in provisioning or what team leaders are doing that you're not quite aware they were doing. The other part of this is just the disruptive nature of going to something like digital onboarding. And it presents some opportunities, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, about who is creating and sending offers to new hires. And because one of the advantages of moving to an online onboarding system is you can start to control via role-based security who can do certain things. So there's really a disruption in, the onboarding project might not just be focused on the talent acquisition team who are creating offers. It might involve other team members. So you need to consider that. The next piece I want to talk about is what we call the offer pack and the workflow. When you move into a paperless onboarding solution, it's all about what we like to say, the offer. That is the employment contract, any supporting documentation, any policies they need to accept, any information you need to collect. And there's a workflow around that. And things you need to consider is like what's in that pack, the collateral that you're collecting for that. So there's some policies and supporting information you may have in paper-based format that need to be digitized. But again, you may need to, if you've got 20 separate policies that you're printing out as forms in an offer pack, in an online experience, you don't want to deliver that as 20 different files. You may want to concatenate those together into a single PDF. So it's a nicer experience for the candidate. You also need to think about the sequencing of the workflow. And what I mean by that is you need to think for your business, what's important? Is it getting the new hire to accept the offer first and then collect all the information from them? Or is the collection really important? And that again, it differs between businesses. So in some high demand businesses where there's a bit of a war to make sure you're getting your candidates who you've offered the job to accept offers really quickly, you might not care about getting them to fill in their work rights, their bank and super and other sort of legislative requirement type information. You're more concerned about getting them to accept the employment offer, and then they can do the information collection later. Whereas in some other industries like health and medical industry, where you need to get a lot of information about them, whether it's qualifications or triggering off background checks, you want to have that happen before the acceptance. So it's just understanding of how you want to sequence information collection and some of the workflow. The next piece to consider is the experience by brand and role type. And a lot of our customers have more than one brand in their business. A couple of good examples we have in our customer base, someone like Retail Zoo, which is a holding company for brands like Boost Juice and Salsas. EVT, which again is a holding company for a whole bunch of hotels, QT Hotels, Ridges Hotels, Threadbow. So being able to treat these brands differently in the onboarding process is really important. You also need to think about how you treat the different role types, because how you onboard an executive or a corporate staff is going to be very different from the onboarding experience for a 15-year-old casual shop worker. So you need to treat those roles differently and make sure the onboarding platform you're going to has that capability. Also remember that you may have different hiring entities that employees are legally hired under. So a good onboarding platform should allow you to cater for multiple brands, roles and hiring entities. And it's really important that things like wording and terminology used in the new hire portal, notifications that go out there are tailored for that. One of the surprising kind of delays in an onboarding project is sometimes from your marketing department, because you'll need a lot of support from them in terms of imagery, wording and branding and creating new collateral that might not have existed in a paper-based format. And look, the last piece to consider in that tailorization is information access. And one aspect of when we talk about information or data that you're collecting is to make sure any onboarding solution you go into can tailor can accommodate for your unique information. So just not the general personal bank tax details that everyone needs to collect in onboarding, but can they capture the information that's unique to your business? Whether, again, that's qualification information. Uniform information is a common one we get with a lot of our customers because they want to collect sizing and uniform preferences in that onboarding. So you need to have that flexibility in the platform. The other aspect of information is the access piece. So, paperless onboarding is really moving that information collection and distribution from a physical to a digital experience, and that opens up both challenges and opportunities for your business. The challenge, I guess, of moving to an online solution for onboarding and going beyond that automation is just making sure that information security is not compromised. And this is a funny experience, us as a vendor, when we talk to organizations who are really concerned quite naturally about the information security. And some people actually regard physical paperwork as more secure than electronic copies. And there's arguments for both. And I experienced this in my personal life. At my kids' kinder, they have this attitude where all the child and family data is in a locked office in the kinder. Some of it's in files and some of it's on a PC, and they're very risk averse about moving any of that information to cloud-based systems because they're worried about security. Ironically, all that data is stored, yes, it's in a locked office, but the computer that a lot of the data is on there locally has no password on it. It's on an old version of Windows and can be basically accessed by anyone at the kinder. Sometimes just getting those attitudes around information security, it's hard to change views. One of the things we've done as a vendor, and we've faced this challenge for a number of years, we're now ISO 27001 certified, which is the international standard for information security management systems. And what that does for our customers is gives them the insurance that we are at a certain threshold of professionalism and process to ensure that customer data is secure. So there's some of the challenges of information access. The opportunities that you get moving to paperless onboarding, though, is immense. One of these is about role-based access to information. So this gives you the ability, one of the big things is it gives you the ability to give people the power to be involved in that offer creation and onboarding process, whereas in a manual system you might not have. So you can now allow team leaders, through quite strict controls about what they can do in the system and what data they can see, you can give them the ability to decentralize the create offer process. You can get more people involved in the review process. And we have a number of stories from our customers where they've been able to decentralize onboarding because an online system gives them that assurance that the compliance and the process is going to be followed because the system is restricting what they can do. Information plays a big piece in going beyond paperless onboarding, and they say data is the new oil. So I want to take a look at what you need to think about with data management, because it is such a big piece of moving from a manual system to an online system. So there's no point moving to digital onboarding if you can't manage the data ball that comes with it. And it is a big ball. Our standard data set for new hires is about 160 fields of information. One of our customers has over 400 pieces of information collected during the onboard process. And this is just one of those weird things about onboarding. I love onboarding because it's so cross-functional. There's a lot of different teams involved, not just HR, but there's payroll, there's IT, there's provisioning teams. And it kind of falls between the gaps of this weird thing of between talent acquisition and talent management. So it's a really unique time, but you are collecting a lot of data. So some of the things you need to get your head around is, the first one I really like is distinguishing between the container and the contents. So let me explain this a little bit. There's a real mind shift that goes on, that you need to worry less about the forms because it's very form driven in a manual process, and worry more about the information on them. One of the big sort of mind shifts you need to do is we often get asked to reproduce all these paper forms when we're going to an online system, because they're like, well, we had this payroll form, we had this new starter form that goes to these departments. And what we say is keep the focus on the info you're collecting and who it has to go to, and less worried about the physical container that it's in. So we like to talk about the payload of data and where that needs to go to, as a differentiator to this is a form we need to produce. The next piece you need to consider is integration. And if you're implementing a point-based onboarding solution like HR Onboard, you need to think about those integrations to both the upstream and the downstream systems in that life cycle. And usually that's recruitment and HRS payroll. Integration's not as scary as it once was. With the advent of cloud products, open APIs and built once type integrations, it really allows you to plug and play systems without a lot of investment. We've invested heavily in our out-of-box integration to both recruitment and HR payroll systems. I think our release we pretty much release a new out-of-the-box integration to a payroll system each month. We just released our Orion integration via web services. And next month, I think we've got Chris 21 coming out via web services as well. So these are integrations where you literally put in your connection details, put in, wire in the mapping between some of the data elements, and that goes straight through into those systems. When we talk about integration, it usually raises the questions, what if you're doing onboarding in your core system? So you don't have a point solution like us, like HR Onboard, and you're using the onboarding features of your all-in-one system. I'd argue there's still some integration there you need to worry about, because most organizations, where they use a core HCM system and they try and do as much as possible in that system, there's still going to be some integration points to other systems. Within the HR tech landscape, that might be a payroll system or a time and attendance system. But outside of the HR tech landscape, you still might have integration requirements to identity management, workflow systems, or document management systems. So it's important to think about where those touch points are. The other part around automating this big ball of data is there's a lot of trigger processes when it comes to onboarding. And by that, I mean the onboarding process is usually the initiator for a lot of other internal processes in the organization. And this might mean that, okay, once we know this new hire's accepted their offer, we now need to go organize some equipment or physical access or electronic access to systems. So it's really important when you move into an online system that you have the ability to use notifications that can be triggered based on actions and conditions in that onboarding workflow. And this is to enable you to orchestrate that release of information to a whole bunch of stakeholders. And those notifications that are triggered, again, it's just not emails and SMSs these days. We do a lot with automating the sending of a payload. Again, the payload is just a transport mechanism for some data. And we send that payload to things like web services that you may have internally. And again, this is just a programmatic way of passing information, so it doesn't need to be handled by a human to go from one system to another. And as IT's function in a lot of organizations is changing now that most of the systems in the cloud, a lot of their job is around orchestration of the moving of information between systems and workflow. So you want to make sure that you have that capability. So look, I think the last piece of Beyond Onboarding is about measuring the success. And we focused on information and data a lot in this Beyond Onboarding because one thing I think is traditionally a lot of support functions like HR or finance are not very good at showing the value they bring to the business. And one of the massive benefits you get by moving to online onboarding is showing the value becomes a lot easier because the process is measurable, it's auditable, and it's a lot more easier to track. There's a couple of issues though. One of the issues is that HR people traditionally aren't great on the numbers and the analytics. And I think a lot of organizations are now slowly addressing that problem, bringing more data-focused people into HR to be able to make better decisions through data. And the other one is that when we talk about onboarding, a lot of HR platforms don't really delve into the onboarding analytics unless you're a dedicated provider like us. And you know, I think one thing a point onboarding solution is strong at is because this is our core focus. We go really deep in this space, both in configurability, but also in terms of the analytics and the insights that we want to show to people. So let's look at some of the numbers. So what I'm showing you is some real stats that comes out of our production systems from one of our well-known retail customers. A lot of numbers here, and you're like, okay, so what does this tell me? And if I use my little magic, have I got my little magic pointer? I'm trying to get my magic pointer up. Here we go. Or did I turn it off? Here we go. You see my magic pointer. What this is telling us, if we look at, this is basically breaking up the offer acceptance into a couple of chunks. With the internal team preparing and reviewing the offer, so this is back office approvals, that sort of piece. The next bit is once the offer goes out to the new hire, we've kind of broken it into 3 stages about waiting for them to log in and complete the offer, then they're completing it, and then any post-acceptance steps, and then finally the sort of processing of that offer into payroll or HR. What we can see with these stats is that in Q4, the average hours to process an offer went up by about 10 hours over Q3, and overall time it's gone up. And so really what analytics do, they don't give you the answers, but they prompt you to ask questions. What we can see here in green here, I can see though, the average hours to create an offer dropped dramatically to 0.8 of an hour from over nearly 4 hours in Q3. So when we drilled down on this data with the customer, what they told us is that they had a lot of new people in recruitment in Q3, so they were getting familiar with their HR processes. So it was taking longer for them to prepare those offers. But what you can see by Q4, they were very familiar with the process that had dropped dramatically. So you know, what analytics does is it gives you some interesting info and just gives you an ability to be able to drill down on that data and ask some questions that's going to help you. That's great to see how we're going internally over time. This is giving us a time series. What you also want to think is, how does this compare to other industries, other companies who are like us, or just the general population? And that's something we now provide our customers, giving them that ability to benchmark themselves against our other customers. We now have the volume of customers, the volume of transactions going through the platform to allow them to compare. And what this is showing you here is just giving you an indicator of the time spent in different areas of the offer process as a percentage of time benchmarked against other customers. And what we can see here is this particular customer is spending a lot more time in, new hires are spending a lot more time waiting to log in and view their offer than the industry average or customer average of 11.7%. So we can see here they're really way above our customer average in terms of the time the offer is with the new hire. And this could, so what does this really mean, and what's actionable around this? What we could recommend here is we could add in some extra notifications, change the wording and the call to actions around when we send them SMSs and emails to put some more urgency in them to encourage them to start filling in their offer earlier. We could also, the HR team could also change the time when they're sending offers out to new starters. And we know from our analytics that there's certain times of the week, certain days of the week, and certain times of the day where you'll get much quicker turnaround times from candidates than other times. Sunday being a good time to send offers out, And for some reason, Wednesday and Thursday between 2 and 3 p.m. I have no idea why, but that's what our statistics tell us. The other piece of measuring success and measuring some of those metrics is getting feedback from candidates themselves. So what you want to make sure is when you go to an online onboarding platform that you can get this real feedback from your new hires, both the good and bad. And this allows you, again, to fine-tune the process, get really instant response about things that may be causing issue in your workflow and being able to optimize that. This feedback in the middle, the not so good, which we have this information collected for our customers all the time, and we get this fed back to us so we can learn about things in the product that we need to improve. But I love some of these quotes. A lot of online stuff for a simple machine operated job. So, that offer process, it's a blue collar worker and you might think, wow, it's great. We're moving to this online platform, but if it's still taking them a lot of time, there's a lot of information there. You gotta understand your audience. Entering super information was a pain. Would have preferred to supply everything later. So again, we were talking about the sequencing of when you want to collect information. In this case, they might not be asking people to formally accept the offer until they do all the paperwork. So you could maybe think about, can I change this process up? And the last one is an interesting from a council customer saying, look, they had questions. The online part's great, but I have questions, but I can't talk to anyone because they seem to be not there when I need them. So again, you're getting this response. So it's really great. So you want to make sure you have a feedback mechanism in your onboarding journey, so you can continue to optimize your program and your processes. So finally, I'd just like to end with show you some real life success stories of people going to a paperless system and some really big time savings. And again, this measuring the success of any project you're taking on in HR is really important. Roy Hill, they literally had 8 people sitting in a room for 8 days doing contracts. It was such a huge process. They've just reduced that amazingly. Another one of our customers is Holmes Glen TAFE, and they have a big seasonal renewal of teaching staff contracts at the end of different terms. And, it went from 4 people for 2 weeks down to 1 person doing it for 2 hours. And they use a bulk upload facility, so the rekeying is really minimalized. And then just in terms of that administrative overhead and saving that time on chasing incomplete forms. I think that's one of the big ones we hear about, deciphering people's scrawl on forms, and that, was that a 2 or is it a 5? And tax file numbers aren't in the right format, that sort of thing. They're really some of the benefits. So that about concludes today's webinar. I'm happy to take any questions if anyone wants to share some experiences or just drill down into anything we've covered today. So Steve, I'll just hand back to you to see if there's any questions there.
Thank you, Peter. We just have enough time for a few questions. The first question that we have here is, how do businesses approach rolling out paperless onboarding? Is it in a big bang once off, or is it by role and job?
Look, that's interesting. And I guess, again, it's kind of that answer, it depends. Certainly our recommendation and our experience of doing onboarding projects is to pick a cohort of employees. So pick a particular role type, whether that's a casual part of your workforce, or it's the corporate staff or execs, and roll those guys out first. The reason why it's better to do an incremental approach, I think, in my opinion, is the learnings you have by doing it for one particular cohort. There's so much to be said for just getting the system live as soon as possible with a minimum viable product. Where, you know, I'm a software guy, so we talk about minimum viable product, agile methodology. I think it's a really good practice in something like an onboarding project, because just the learnings you get quickly that you can bring back in to optimize. I definitely recommend that trickle approach to implementation.
Great. And our final question here is, what are some of the barriers that companies face in improving their onboarding process?
Look, I think, you know, probably the biggest one, I think we talked about change management, and being, you know, that resistance to change is sometimes hard. It's funny, some of the stories when, you know, our teams have helped configure workflows and things like that for our customers who are going live, and we're like, yep, you're all good. Now you just got to put your first offer through the platform. And that resistance by some of the recruitment staff to change what they're so used to doing, which is the paper-based format, to that first step of going to an online. So again, it's that change management piece. The other barrier, I think, is just getting executive buy-in for the process and being able to demonstrate the benefits and the return on investment, both the tangible and intangible. Because, you know, we talk about differentiating transactional onboarding and the sort of induction and engagement onboarding, but it's amazing how much, you know, intangible benefits about goodwill about the brand and that first touch experience just by having a great transactional onboarding process that's online, and, you know, I'm not repeating the same information form after form. It has a great feel for candidates, and it leaves a really good taste in their mouth for what's coming of their, you know, of their future role with your company.
Great. Well, that's it for today. Thanks everyone for joining us. If you'd like any further information on anything we discussed today, there's plenty of content on the website which tackles the topics and issues within the employee onboarding and engagement space. Also feel free to book in an obligation-free session with one of our onboarding specialists. We will be sending out a recording of the webinar if you'd like to go over anything you may have missed, so keep an eye out on your inboxes. And that's it. Thanks everyone for joining in, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks everyone. Don't forget, next month also we'll have a webinar talking about more on the engagement piece. So look forward to seeing some of you there again. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.